Chair, my question really is across the pillars, and it's in relation to the hashtag sex is not rent question that was raised in the Dáil earlier today by Deputy Ruth Coppinger. Now, the woman in question I met along with Deputy Coppinger, and I want to talk about that in a moment. But before I do, I will just ask the Minister 4 questions. So, briefly they are: do you accept, Minister, that the housing crisis seriously increases the vulnerability of women in situations such as this? Question 2, what steps do you propose to take to ensure that people in such a situation are safe to speak out without, for example, fear of eviction? What steps do you propose to take to gauge the prevalence of this problem in this society, in this state? And lastly, I'm just getting messages coming through here which indicate that our offices, Deputy Coppinger's office, have been contacted by quite a lot of people in the last hour and a half. People who are HAP tenants. And we are contacting those people to get exact detail, but it seems to be the case that some landlords interviewing people for HAP tenancies are raising the idea of sexual favours if you get the nod here for the tenancy. So perhaps you might comment in relation to if that is the case, what action might be taken. Now, I met this woman with Deputy Coppinger recently.
Deputy, I just feel obliged to, and I'm sure you're aware, just to make sure that you don't name any individual in your important contribution.
Well, I have the correspondence here, right, and it's clear who the correspondence comes from, but I will not be naming any names at the committee today. So I met the woman with Deputy Coppinger recently. She was a working woman, young woman, working. The idea of having a place on her own was a real difficulty because of the high cost of rent. So she had been sharing accommodation with a friend. So there's a direct connection there to the housing crisis the country is experiencing under this government. The friend, for her own reasons, decided to leave the accommodation. She was moving on with her life, etc. And the woman in question was facing the threat of homelessness. Once again, the housing crisis we have under this minister and this government was a factor here. The landlord then found himself in a position of power over this young woman. For example, some of the texts with the suggestions were made only a matter of days before she had to leave the premises. Once again, the housing crisis was a factor here. There were 3 offers made to this woman by the man who she estimates to be in his mid-60s. One offer was, solve your problem by coming to live with me. One offer was, come to dinner with me and we'll see what happens and just continue to pay the rent you've been paying, which would be half rent on the property. Or that maybe if things went the right way, that there could be free, no charge for the rent. Now in Britain, there are 250,000 estimated cases of this type of situation. I think that there must be many cases in this country. I think that this could be a Me Too moment for the housing crisis. And I've asked my questions of the Minister, but I would also ask a question to people generally. And that is, I would encourage people to speak out about this. I would be stunned if this was the only case. I know it's not the only case. And I think now is the time for people who have had this horrible experience to speak out, and let's lift the lid on one of the uglier and murkier aspects of the reality of the housing crisis that we have under this government. And if the Minister could answer the questions, I would appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Deputy, for the question. I addressed this issue in the Dáil earlier today. If what you are saying happened, and that's illegal and that's a matter for the Gardaí. I have already attempted to make contact with Deputy Coppinger to get information about the case, and my office is also contacting the Department of Justice to see how we might compile statistics or evidence in this area. As with anything, it's important to get the best information possible to know what policy responses might be needed. And if policy responses are needed, they won't just be housing policy responses. They won't just fall to this part of the government because it is a wider criminal issue. What I would say is that a number of people are vulnerable because of the housing crisis that we have. We have a housing shortage. It is one that we are trying to address. People find themselves in incredibly difficult circumstances. The one that you outline, obviously, but of course families having to go into emergency accommodation, or people being housed or homed in substandard and dangerous accommodation. That's why we've brought forward the rent reforms that we have. That is why we are building tens of thousands of more homes than we were previously. And it's also why we've put in place better emergency supports for people who find themselves vulnerable at this time of crisis. And I would just caution in one regard, Deputy, in terms of your contribution, of the fact that you received a few phone calls to now link something that you are making an allegation of to something very specific like the housing assistance payment. Because HAP is working successfully for tens of thousands of people. If HAP was not in place, those people would be even more vulnerable because of the housing shortage that we have. And I think that comments from colleagues in your party have served to actually undermine that support, because it does help people. So let's be very, very careful in the comments that we make around this very, very sensitive issue. And let's make sure that the help that we are trying to give to everyone who is suffering from the housing crisis is directed in the best way possible to actually help those people.
Okay, how much time do I have, Chair, to come back in?
You'll have time in the follow-up round, Deputy Barry. You took your allocated 5 minutes in your opening round of questioning. Senator Boyan is next.